Greetings. Thank you for viewing this webinar. My name is Dr. Hilda Billups, and I currently serve as the chair of the Webinars Committee for TACUSPA, the Texas Association of College and University Student Personnel Administrators. You will notice we have changed the format for this webinar just a bit. This is one of our pre-recorded webinars. In these pre-recorded webinars, we seek to learn from experienced student affairs leaders. Our guest for today is Dr. Gabriel Crosby, who serves as the Assistant Vice President of Student Success at Lamar University. Allow me to introduce our facilitator for today's webinar. Dr. Anthony Edwards supports TACUSPA as the Director of Research and as a member of the Webinars Committee. Anthony serves as an assistant professor in the Department of Educational Leadership and Technology at Tarleton State University. Anthony's teaching assignments include higher education leadership, higher education student services, higher education finance, higher education policy and politics, higher education history, and the Comprehensive Community College. Dr. Edwards previously served as director of Tarleton Online at Tarleton State University, a professor of biology at Panola College, senior vice president of talent at the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce, and science department chair at Granbury High School. Dr. Edwards also served as a secondary science teacher in Fort Worth ISD and Huckabee ISD. Anthony's research agenda focuses on organizational change in higher education with respect to strategic planning, STEM education, higher education marketing, academic advising, and educational technology. Anthony has published manuscripts in the Journal of Higher Education Management and the HAPS Educator. In addition to chairing dissertation committees, Dr. Edwards supports student success as coordinator of the Higher Education Leadership Concentration of the Master of Education program in Educational Administration. We're very excited to have Dr. Edwards to serve as our facilitator for this webinar and thankful to Dr. Crosby for his willingness to share. I will now turn our webinar over to Dr. Edwards.
Thank you so much, Dr. Billups. So let me introduce Dr. Gabriel Crosby. So he is from Beaumont, Texas, and he is the youngest of 4 children, comes from a working class family. He's also a first-generation college student. He attended Lamar University, where he earned his undergraduate and graduate degrees. He actually also has his Doctor of Education degree in organizational leadership, and that degree has a concentration in higher education. He earned that degree from Abilene Christian University. So Gabe actually got interested in student affairs while he was in college. And so during that time, he became active in different student organizations like Student Government Association, freshman orientation activities, Greek life. And that's what really propelled him into his 20-year career in higher education. And in that time, he's held different roles, whether it be in recruitment, graduate admissions, academic advising, residence life, as well as program administration. And at this time, he's actually serving at his alma mater, Lamar University, as Assistant Vice President for Student Success. And in that role, he is responsible for overseeing a unit that does such things as student support services, undergraduate advising, as well as academic support. So at this time, please join me in welcoming Dr. Gabriel Crosby to the TACUSPA stage.
Thank you, Dr. Edwards. Although I will say your bio sounds more interesting than mine. Maybe I should be interviewing you today.
I don't think so. I think you've got a pretty interesting story, actually. So
Okay,
let's get started with that. So, all right. So in terms of leadership, leadership deals sometimes with managing challenges. So what's one of your biggest challenges that you face as a leader, and how have you overcome that challenge?
Right up front, right? Gave me an easy question. I would say
It's right. That's right. Hey, you know, in the TACUSPA stage, we don't play around. So
well, I think one of the things that we kind of have to be concerned about, and some of the challenges, is the fact that there are so many moving pieces now to the roles that we play. The fact that it isn't, as a kind of a new professional or a kind of mid-level person, you kind of have a smaller, sphere of focus for kind of some of the challenges that you might have to kind of manage. There might be, an individual who's a personnel issue, or you might have a small project that you're trying to get, squared away as a deadline. But I think as you move into higher level leadership roles at a vice president or kind of an equivalent, you start facing the unknowns, and you start having to think about much more strategically, okay, what happens if this, and this pop up, even though you have yet to take care of A, B, and C at the front end. Those are still moving pieces. I'll give you an example right now. We are in the process of doing a system implementation. We're transitioning from one system to another system, and we literally went through about 2.5 months of our procurement process just to be able to kind of get that squared away. Well, we didn't fully factor that into our timeline, but we still have a drop dead that we have to get this project done at this particular time. Now, our technical people are willing to work with that, and they're kind of still on board with kind of the calendar that we've set for ourselves. But just today, I had a question from a colleague saying, "Hey, I know you're working on this project. I know you're kind of you're leading this. Is there any way we can connect? Because there's something in my shop that I need to think about, and I wanted to ask you about it because it may impact us." And so now that's another thing. It's kind of like, yeah, we kind of thought about that, but we're in midstream building the car, and now someone else wants to go ahead and put an extra feature onto the car that we purchased a couple of months ago. So I would say it's just the unknown, along with the challenges that you're still having to deal with, that are kind of the things that I have learned in my role these last 2 years.
So what I'm hearing is both a capacity to manage different components and plan, but I also an open-mindedness and flexibility to adjust as the situation calls for it. So I mean, those are in some ways two very different skills, but I think, as student affairs leaders, I think you have to be at least somewhat flexible, right?
Absolutely, because again, it is the great difference. You can plan for everything. You cannot plan for people sometimes. And that's okay. That's just kind of the situation, planning for people's emotions, planning for people's intentions. You can try and figure those out in advance, but once you get into kind of a certain phase of your career, those are things that will challenge you the most. It isn't always the money. It isn't always necessarily um, the technical things. It is most often, how do you manage relationships effectively to get things done?
Relationships do matter, and especially when people don't report to you. I mean, especially when they do, but there are a lot of things that happen that affect your work, and people don't have to do things for you. And how you treat people can oftentimes make the difference between whether they work on it now or they work on it in a month when they feel like they have time to do it. So,
Absolutely.
um, so I will ask you a little bit easier question, I think, for this second question.
Thank you.
So tell me about some of your previous roles and how they've shaped you.
Um, so, okay. So let's talk a little. I would say I'll address it from this perspective. I have had most of my positions where I have been untrained for each role, meaning that in some fashion, I have taken on an opportunity that I didn't always necessarily have a direct understanding or hands-on knowledge of. And I'll just kind of walk through some of those, right? So when I first started my professional career, I started in residence life. I started as kind of an administrative support person, then started transitioning into a couple of full-time live-in housing roles. Number one, I never lived on campus.
Mm.
It was 10 minutes away from my main campus, living at home with my parents and family. And so I had the luxury of being able to come home at the end of the day. But for some reason, I was in the right place at the right time to be able to kind of pick up a job that I could apply problem solving skills of look at a situation and try and figure out a solution to an issue. It's kind of why I majored in history, because I liked understanding what happened previously and what were the factors that influenced things moving forward. And I kind of looked at that problem solving as a plug-in for my career. Then I went into undergraduate admissions. Now I will tell you, I am an extrovert by necessity and position. My true nature is to be an introvert, and I am much more of a homebody and enjoy doing those kinds of things. But here I am taking on a recruiting role that requires me to go out and present in front of classrooms and to talk to counselors and teachers and to do presentations and to manage, events on campus. And I can tell you that was one of the biggest stretches for me because, like I said, I'm okay being by myself and not talking to other people for long stretches of time. From there, I went into graduate recruitment for MBA programs.
Hmm.
So I am neither a business major, I do not have an MBA, and I went to work at Texas A&M University, which, if you are familiar with Texas A&M University, you will know that that is a big personality, big energy kind of place. And so all of the things that I just mentioned all came into one position of being a problem solver, being an extrovert, being someone who was not attached to the university. And so that's also a situation of getting yourself ingrained in the culture too. So all
Yes.
of these things in a role, and it's kind of like, oh wow, what did I do with myself? And so um, it's kind of been an evolution of things over time where I've kind of moved into roles where even now with my current role, there have been aspects of the position where, again, I may not have done it before, but there are, some personal characteristics and some things in my toolkit that I've built up over the years that I've been able to plug in and at least make myself effective and help bring some change and improvements where I've gone along the way.
Well, you I think you're I think that sometimes there's a stereotype of student affairs professionals that everyone is extroverted. And I find that that is not always the case. Some people, I mean, like you said, some of us learn how to be extroverted because, it comes with the job. You
Mhm.
learn how to interact with people. And yeah, if you spend some time in College Station, you'll definitely have to learn how to get out of your shell and talk to people. But yeah, that's interesting. So, in terms of, you made this transition from being a student and being involved in student affairs to being an employee. And so you had all these great experiences. Are there some lessons that you learned from a previous leader that have stuck with you?
Mhm. Um, I would say um, in recent years that trust is an incredibly important feature um, that you try and engender with the people that you work with. Um, also being a good listener. So I'll start with the first one. I think trust in the person that you are being led by and trying to build trust with those people who you are leading, that you are supervising and managing. I think in order for you to trust in your leader, you have to feel to a certain degree that this guy or woman is going to have your back, that they have the best intentions moving forward for you, your area, your organization, and that you are going to a certain degree, want to work harder, do your best. I think it's very difficult to um, try and be the better employee, the better professional, if you don't necessarily kind of have that relationship or that confidence in the individual that is kind of above you or kind of leading your organization. But I think also in the people, if as a leader, I think you also have to entrust in your staff and in your employees and in your colleagues that they're going to contribute, that they're going to give the best that they can, and that they're going to get the job done. I think um, there are some leaders out there who think that micromanaging is the best way of solving problems where they exist. that might have, resolve issues in the short term. But I think ultimately you're shortchanging your organization and your team by not giving them an opportunity to learn from some mistakes, as well as kind of practicing some of the things that they have potentially been tasked with doing. It's not going to be perfect every time. One of the things that I have written on my board over here is a reminder to myself on a daily is progress, not perfection. Everything that happens, there's going to be some kind of end result, right? It's either going to work out, it's not going to work out. Maybe in the middle, it kind of screwed up, 50-50 results. But I think ultimately, also, you have to think about what's going on with my people, what's going on with the people around me. So one thing that I have learned from the very beginning of my career, and what I have tried to kind of instill in others is to listen and understand what's going on in the situation, understand what other people are facing, because it's easy to make a knee-jerk reaction, right? You see a superficial problem, and you think, oh, well, I've got that problem solved. I can do this. We can just make this change. But not having a full understanding of what's behind that oftentimes can lead to bigger problems. And so I think as leaders, we're so used to talking and so used to having people come to us and say, okay, how do you want to solve this problem? And we don't often think, well, how about I sit back and just kind of listen to what you got first? Kind of bring me up to speed on what's going on. And that isn't a sign of, you're avoiding the problem. It's you're trying to have a better understanding of what the situation is. And maybe you've got an answer. Maybe you don't, and you need to think about it a little bit. But I think those are a couple of things that I've, learned that some effective leaders I've had do. But more often than not, some leaders that I've had don't build that trust and don't listen very well, unfortunately.
I would agree. Unfortunately, listening uh, is a skill that you have to be very intentional about. Because I think in our fast-paced world, everybody's busy and everybody's right,
Mhm.
and so listening can sometimes be hard. What I also heard in your explanation was that sometimes as leaders, people come to us to make the decision, but part of our role as leaders is to coach others to be able to start to be able to make some of those decisions. Now, obviously, there'll be some decisions you have to make, but you're part of being a leader is being a capacity builder in your team,
Mhm.
and sort of equipping them. It's like you said, instead of taking a step back and you know not answering the question for them, but walking them through how you might think through it and asking them the questions to help them sort of arrive at a similar conclusion, or maybe they bring something to the table you haven't considered. But again, um, you at some point, you're an AVP now, so at some point you may be a VP or a president or something, and somebody's going to have to step into that chair and answer those questions and help make those decisions. So, uh, I think it's important to sort of coach up the next group of people to be able to make those decisions.
One thing that I've kind of come to determine that it's a good idea to hire smart people. Um, you can't be afraid of hiring somebody who might know more or might have a different type of experience, because you never know when that type of background is going to come in and save a situation or come up with a new program idea or, you know, ultimately help provide the solution that everyone in the room who has a higher level title has been missing. And so that's kind of my position, my philosophy. It's be open and honest to those around you. That's like, hey, this is my position. This is where I come from, but I don't necessarily have all the answers. Um, so that's kind of why I want to try and start a dialogue to be able to kind of put other considerations on the table. Sometimes it works out. Some people, are more brave than others. Sometimes you have to pull it out of them a little bit and work with them a little bit longer. But I think to your point, I may not be in this role forever, and somebody's got to take my place. Somebody's going to be responsible for these, areas that I'm, overseeing right now. Who's going to do that? It may be the people who are here now. So why not prepare them and kind of build up some skills that they don't necessarily realize they have, and transition them into a place that they really are more comfortable than they recognize.
And you've alluded to this, but what would you say is your leadership style? And, how does that style guide how you lead?
So you mentioned at the beginning, I earned my doctorate in organizational leadership. I earned it a few years ago. By that point, I'd been in my professional career about 15 years or so, and it had been the long time goal for me to get my doctorate. I did a little bit later than I had planned on it, but I got it knocked out. And one of the things that I started recognizing was that, okay, teaching leadership is, and reading from books is one thing, but it was through that process that I learned, hey, I'm actually doing some of these things, and there's a name attached to it. What's that all about? And so I kind of discovered in the process of that I had been doing it more comfortable in certain styles. One of them was authentic leadership. I think one of them is adaptive leadership,
Right.
and then ultimately servant leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Peter Northouse, kind of
Yes.
textbook kind of reader in the area of leadership. That was a great book. It's one that I've kind of gone back to on occasion too, because there's a whole plethora of options out there. Some people are going to say, "Oh, I'm a transformative leader, and I'm this or that," and that's great. One of the things that I had to learn about myself is that I am who I am. I'm going to be able to adjust in certain margins, right? But my inherent nature is going to lean in certain directions. And so as I was kind of looking at some of these options that Northhouse talks about, I found myself kind of leaning comfortably in one direction. I found myself settling comfortably into others. Authentic leadership is, again, I am who I am. I try and let my people know my personality, my expectations. What do we have to face? What are some of the things that are in front of us that we need to think about? Being honest and forthright. I try to be that as best I possibly can. Adaptive, really important now because I have really a range of people who are part of my team. Individuals who are very established in their careers and individuals who have just graduated from college. And in positions past, I was working with students. So I had student workers, people who were non-degreed, and I was working with individuals who were also degree professionals. And so I think working with all of those folks, you can't always apply the same practices with everybody. You're going to have to coach and mentor some of your younger staff. You're going to have to look to others as kind of peers. And so how do I work with you and kind of help you along your pathway? And then that is where servant leadership comes into play. What do I need to do to help you do your job? What resources, what clarity can I provide? Let me get out of the way so you can do what you need to do to be successful. So I think those are for me, those are kind of where I've fallen most comfortably. Now, in a year, 2, 5 years, I'll look back in Northhouse and there'll be something else that I kind of have been drawn to. So I don't necessarily think you can stick necessarily, or that you have to stick to one, characteristic. But I think you have to be true to yourself, because if you are not, other people will see that. Your productivity and your ability to get things done will come through. And then I think you start damaging yourself more, because you no longer have an established genuineness that people can trust with you. So I think it's important for those who are, wanting to be leaders for the future. You kind of do some actual reading, educate yourself on some of these things, pick up a book, go to that, when we're at TACUSPA, for the next conference, there's plenty of sessions going on. Some of them are about leadership. Kind of look into what you might not be aware of, take a chance and learn something a little bit about yourself. Because I think oftentimes people are afraid to, get pigeonholed sometimes. And it's like, this is what I am. But in some instances, it's accurate. And so find what you're comfortable with, but make sure that it is beneficial for you and the people that you're working with. If it's not the right style, you're not going to be successful for yourself and for others.
Right. I think authenticity is critical. I mean, if people don't trust you, you can't really be a transformative leader if people don't trust you.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't, people do more for leaders that they trust than for leaders that they don't trust, right? So now in terms of this next question, I'm going to kind of combine a couple questions. So one part is, tell me a little bit about some of the areas that you supervise, and then based on that, how do you see student services, student affairs sort of changing in the future? Where do you think we're headed as a profession?
So, so first question, the areas that I oversee. So my unit areas are the undergraduate advising center, where we work with our incoming freshmen, our current freshmen, and then sophomore populations around campus. We work with academic support services. So that is our tutoring, our academic coaching, our supplemental instruction. At my institution, it also happens that my student support center also oversees our freshman transition program. It's a little bit different than other institutions, but I think that's kind of unique to us and it's important. And that's a big program for us because that program supports all of our incoming freshmen coming in for their first semester of study here at the university. Secondly, there is our support services for at-risk probationary population students. So those individuals who have been struggling academically have, need for additional or more intrusive support, mechanisms. And so that is another team that kind of falls under my purview that I'm trying to still build. What's unique about my area is the fact that while these areas tend to fall under student affairs in other places, I am not under student affairs technically. I am under enrollment management division here. But I think that then moves into your question: what is the future of student affairs and student services? Well, at other institutions, some of those segments that I just talked about are over on the academic side. I was at a conference recently talking with some colleagues, and some of the things that I do at another institution that I was talking with this individual about, he's on the academic affairs side. And so I think we're trending into waters where the idea of student affairs isn't just the housing folks, people who work in student awards, the people who are over at the rec center. Student affairs and student support, student engagement really is kind of an umbrella approach in some institutions. It's going to require us to have a much better understanding of what the larger university is like. In my previous position, I was a program director of graduate programs in business. And it was really the first time that I had the opportunity to engage and interact with faculty on a regular basis and really understand what they go through in securing their positions and managing their classrooms, developing their curriculum, understanding how those things move from a piece of paper on someone's desk all the way up to the coordinating board, kind of understanding that whole process. And so where I take that is in my role today, I have an understanding of what our faculty now go through, what's happening, or what's potentially happening in the college side with some of these things. And I will tell you that then introduces the empathy that I have for the academic colleagues of the institution, because I get what they go through. I haven't been in the classroom, I'm not a teacher, but I understand, having worked with individuals on that side of the shop, that their jobs are just as challenging as ours in the student facing side and student services. And so how do we work together to get things done? Or what are some of the considerations that we have to think about? I think you can get very insulated very quickly. You know, if you're an academic, you're a professor, you never think about what's happening in that side of the university and vice versa. We don't often have those cross connections to help us understand. And so I think that's ultimately we're trending in that because as you see all these different units and services starting to mix and mingle, we're going to have a better understanding of these things because we are so interconnected that each of us is contributing to student success in some fashion. It's just we have a different facet of it. But I think that will help us understand each other a little bit better and then make us a bit more on a larger scale, macro scale, empathetic with one another. Because it's easy to make a decision and not know, right? It's another thing that if you've got a little bit of skin in the game, you know someone who works in health services, you know somebody who's working over in education, who's working on something similar from an academic perspective. There's a chance that you could actually get along and solve some problems that y'all hadn't thought about before. So I know that different institutions are in different phases of that type of organization. Texas State University, for example, kind of combined 2 divisions worth of services and kind of activities, and they're working through that. From what I've heard from colleagues there, they're still working on that after about 2 years or so, 2 or 3 years to kind of make things work, and that takes time. None of this is going to be a quick solution, but I think ultimately we're going to start seeing the integration of some things that we probably hadn't thought about before. But that ultimately, when we think, yeah, that makes sense that that should be tied to student affairs or student engagement in some fashion or student success. You can't separate them. So that's kind of where I think we're going to evolve to.
I think you're right. I think, and part of it has to do with the size of the institution. I think some of our larger institutions kind of have student affairs integrated under academic colleges, so some of them may already be doing some of that. But I do think we're overall moving in that direction. Let's just be honest, we are in an era of cost cutting and figuring out how do we be more efficient about what we do. And so people are figuring out, how can people work together? How can we make, create things that are a little bit more synergistic? I know, even at our institution, if we look at our system where we, communicate with students, you see if a student will have a care team and there'll be, faculty advisor, but then there's folks from, counseling or, other career services, other parts that are assigned to sort of this person's care team or the student's care team. And, there's ideally some level of interaction with all those folks in order to help that student along their journey. I think you're right. I also think, historically, if you think about, college presidents, like there was a long time trend where basically it was like provost then president. And what we're seeing probably over the last 5-10 years is a lot of presidents are coming out of student affairs. And I do think some of that is because of what you've talked about is some of them are getting these experiences where they're interacting across divisions and they're getting to see the big picture. And so I think that actually represents a big opportunity for student affairs professionals, so that the more they get to interact with academic affairs, the more they get to interact with enrollment management, they're widening the scope of their knowledge and competency, which is going to help prepare them for larger and bigger jobs.
And I think you have to, remember it was a couple of years ago, it was a big trend to bring in people from the private sector to be university leaders, whether it be chancellor or president's role. In some instance, history not that long ago, there were military leaders who were brought in to kind of help shape things up. Universities are very complex organizations. And so how do you streamline and identify efficiencies and get people to talking? So I think whether it's a student affairs professional, somebody from the private sector, we're in this mode now where I think system leaders, governmental leaders look at higher ed institutions and start thinking, okay, how do we make it make more sense? How do we help our students make it make more sense and help them graduate ultimately? And so I think as people who work in student affairs and student services need to be mindful of that. It's like, how can you show that you are a problem solver and that you can get things done and that you can work well with others and collaborate to solutions? Because whether it's a traditional academic, person, or a former corporate CEO who's running your university now, or your college, you have to be prepared for those type of changes in the college setting now. That's just kind of where we are in today's climate.
And you mentioned in terms of your scope of responsibility dealing with, academic success and some of those, tutoring and some of the other areas. One of the things that, we know is it's not just higher ed, but artificial intelligence is becoming a bigger part of our lives in all aspects of industries. Uh, and I wonder in your areas, are you seeing any interesting or innovative applications of artificial intelligence to be able to support student success?
So one of the interesting you asked that question. We were talking with our project consultants about a week or so ago, and they brought up the fact that this new system that we are hopefully, knocking on wood, in about 5 and 6 months that we'll be running, has an AI feature to it where we are potentially going to be able to, talk with this, AI to be able to address questions that we haven't thought of in the process of build out right now, right? We've got certain specifications that we're contracted and got this thing, set that we're going to build out, but there's still the unknown. And apparently there is a feature of this system that will allow us to go in and do follow-up and ask questions and see, can we provide, can we get answers to some things that have just come up that we then can build out with the system that we're about to kind of implement. Even on the admissions side, my counterpart on admissions and recruitment has talked about her system, which is kind of a sister to the one that I'm, working to get built out. Also having a feature that factors into some of their admissions recruiting strategies and planning. I think it is something that we have to be open to. I'm not going to say that it's a perfect thing. I think we're ultimately still going to be responsible for making decisions on our own.
Correct.
Hard, but I think it is coming much sooner rather than we thought. And in places, just like I was talking about, maybe in places that we hadn't thought about, that it's going to be something that is not perfect, but it is at least getting us closer to getting our answers that we previously thought. It's going to build efficiencies. It's going to replace some things. Unfortunately, it may wind up replacing people in the long term in certain places. I think that's the concern about an innovation and new technology is, what's the impact on people? Right now, I don't necessarily see that, but I think that's something that we have to be prepared for as an organization is what can technology do for us now that maybe we don't require a person to do that for us. But I think on the academic side, that's certainly, been the case in conversation amongst academics is the use of certain systems and apps in the classroom setting and allowing it to help students to do the work. I think the more restrictions that you place on it, the more people want to try use it and will find ways to work around you as opposed to, okay, well, how about we integrate it and figure out what does it give us and how do we learn from that, material that it gave us versus struggling to try and keep it out of the classroom. Because believe it or not, our students are smart. They may not always get the lecture and what came out of the book, but they are problem solvers to a certain degree, and they're going to figure out a way how to use it. So how are we going to be able to start using it in the work that we do? Not just now, but for the future. So
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. I think, before there was AI, people were still finding ways to cheat. And so I don't think that AI somehow has made cheating a thing. I think there was cheating before, and there'll be cheating after. How we deal with that is how we deal with it. But
Mhm.
like you said, it's not going anywhere. And the reality is, many of them are going to go into professions where they're going to expect them to use it. And if they're not getting that practice in college, I would argue that that's a missing piece of their student development if we're not uh, getting them those experiences, whether it's inside the classroom or even in their student activities. Uh, because I think it's just becoming one of those job skills that a lot of employers are going to start expecting.
Well, and let's put it out into the atmosphere for whoever, listens to this recording, now or in the future as we look towards our next jobs. We are not advocating teaching our students how to cheat. We are encouraging them to utilize resources that contribute to problem solving and
Correct.
to identifying answers. There are some people who will use technology, as people have done throughout history, for bad things.
Right.
We have to be able to identify and encourage the use of technology for positive and beneficial things. And so I think
Yeah.
that's what our mindset has to change about it, because, you know, people think about that and they say, oh, you're going to cheat with this. So like, well, that is still possible.
Hmm.
From the days of people sliding in notes into their t-shirt sleeves and, hiding it in the calculator cover and, their phones, the cheat sheet is always going to be there. But we have to think about it in the context of, are we
Right.
providing you something that you
Yeah.
can adapt to for more beneficial purposes?
I think,
So,
on the academic side, how we'll assess students will have to change, because some things are more prone to just being like, if you ask a question, the AI can, and AI is constantly evolving what it can do, right? But I think if we ask questions of students that are better suited for AI, then perhaps we need to ask better questions. Because I think at the end of the day, what I tell my students is I don't necessarily want to know what AI thinks because AI is not a student in my class. My job is
mhm.
I really want to know what you think and what your experience is and how your experiences have shaped you and how they interact with the content that we're teaching. Um, and yes, you can feed in a lot of your life story into a GPT model, uh, but it really is not. That's not what I'm looking for. I think there are always going to be people who are going to try to do that, but uh, I think part of is that the way that we do business in higher ed is going to change. The way that
Mhm.
we teach is going to have to change. The way that we advise students is going to change. The way that we do student services is going to change. The way we do career services is going to change because AI is going to uh, impact all of these different disciplines, right? So the way we do admissions will change because again, can be very helpful in admissions.
Absolutely.
Uh, so, but that's the road that we are on, whether we want to or not. Um, what I do want to conclude with is, are there any books or podcasts that you've read or listened to that have been helpful for you as a leader? And those can be student affairs or not.
So I am not a podcast guy. I know folks love those. I kind of just fall asleep on those. I'm not really, I kind of lose train of thought. So I have a goldfish kind of attention span sometimes, so I don't always kind of focus on that. But having been a history major, I do still clutch onto books, actual like
Mhm.
books that people can turn pages on. And so I don't necessarily, so there were lots of, good materials that I read as a doctoral student that I, occasionally will go back to. But I still have a love of understanding people, understanding past events, and understanding how they got there. And so I've always kind of gone back to, um, either historical books or biographies, again, to understand all of those kinds of things. I went back, I was kind of going through my bookshelf a little while back. Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin was a really good one because it gave a perspective on a really complex situation involving some really complex people, and understanding how Abraham Lincoln, during his time in the Civil War, brought in a cadre of rivals, people who had their own kind of goals and plans for the future, and try to use those skills and kind of those backgrounds to kind of bring results and benefit not just his administration but the country. And so I think I look for those books. One other book that I was thinking about, or that I'm working on right now, it's a really long book. I don't know why I pick really long books, but Gene Edward Smith's FDR biography, talking a little bit about how he is a character or a figure who was complex in nature, but he had an inherent kind of interest in understanding other people and their situations, and being able to kind of then boil down the problem to its simplest form. Because ultimately, as we think about big problems, what are we really trying to solve here? Like, let's not try and create bigger problems than we really need. What is it that we need to fix? What is it that we're trying to solve? I think that's something else that is really important for a leader to understand, is don't overcomplicate the situation even more than it probably is, and bringing people along with you in that situation. Bring them along to solve the problems that need to be solved. And if you come up with something great and wonderful following that, that's even better. That's icing on the cake. But I think ultimately, as you are thinking about being a leader, that you really have to think about the people who are impacted, the people who are involved in the various kind of strata of that problem-solving process, and think about the end goal, right? Because it can be very easy to veer off in another direction and not ever solve the problem that you intended to, shoot for. And then a few years ago, Robert Gates, who was the former Secretary of Defense, former president of Texas A&M University. He was president before my time there, unfortunately, so I didn't get to serve under him. But a complex career, an interesting career. He has said publicly the best job he had was working as president of Texas A&M University, and he was Secretary of Defense. But I think ultimately, what his presence and his background and kind of what I read in the book was, his book is called Duty, and he has, regardless of the situation, this is what I'm here to do. This is what I'm here to solve. And so it's a focus on why you are present in this particular place and time, and recognizing that that's why I'm here, and this is what I need to kind of focus my time and attention on. There's going to be extraneous things that come along the way, but ultimately keep your mind present and focused, and work with your people to stay on course. Because again, if you veer off in the wrong direction, you may actually wind up hurting more than you're helping them. So I look to kind of current figures and kind of seeing what they have done in their careers as kind of guiding point for myself. I'll always read books. I'll read books on policy and education and research articles and things like that. But I'll still always crawl back to a good history book about a figure to try to understand how did they get to where they were. And some people start in really underwhelming situations and come out and do great things. So that's a better textbook for me than some of the other stuff that's out there on the market or that people talk about on the radio. So, but that's for me.
Well, Well, that's very, very helpful because I think, there's that quote about, if we don't learn from our past, we'll be, doomed to repeat it. So I think it's important uh, to learn those lessons from folks who've been there, so that you can uh, learn from their successes as well as maybe, their failures. But I appreciate the opportunity to get to know you a little better, learn
Thanks for
about,
talking with me.
yeah, definitely. Some of the takeaways, from for me, you talked about trust and why that's so important, both of the leader and their team and the team and the leader. Listening, is an important skill for leaders, and also flexibility to be able to adjust even though you've got some plans in place. Focusing on progress instead of perfection, and making sure that your team is growing and getting better, and giving them that opportunity to fail without necessarily feeling too bad about themselves. Um, Coaching others, help them make decisions and grow as leaders. Integrating academic, student affairs, enrollment management, and the opportunities that creates. Integration of AI into student services, enrollment management. Uh, Again, learning from history, and some of those books that you mentioned as far as Team Arrivals, Duty, and the Franklin Roosevelt biography, were some of my takeaways. But I definitely appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us today, and share some of your lessons about leadership. So
Well, thank you for the
with
opportunity
that, I'm
today.
going to say thank you, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Billups.
Thank you for viewing this webinar. We would like to thank Dr. Crosby again for sharing with us. Please check our YouTube channel for more webinars like this one, as well as recordings of our other webinar types. If you missed a webinar this year, we invite you to watch the recording. If you're interested in presenting, serving as a panelist for a future webinar Wednesday, or participating in a pre-recorded webinar, please consider completing the proposal form. The link will be included in the description for this video. Finally, the TACUSPA membership year runs from January to December. If you're not yet a member of TACUSPA, we encourage you to join us. Thank you. We hope you have a great day.